Okay, I'd like to request everyone to please stand for the Philippine National Anthem before we start the program. Thank you. Again, good morning, everyone, and welcome to the launch of What Light It Can Hold, the Philippine Short Story in the 21st Century. I'm 𝗩𝗲𝗄𝗎, and I'm Deputy Director of the UP Institute of Creative Writing, and I'll be your host and moderator for this morning. I'd like to thank everyone for joining us here today despite the busyness of the week, because it's the midterms here in the university. And well, this event, this launch that we'll be doing today is brought to you by Milflores Publishing and the 𝗩𝗂𝗏, UP Institute of Creative Writing. This book launch and book talk is part of the 𝗩𝗂𝗏's Panayam sa Panitikan or PAN project, a series of lectures and discussions designed by the 𝗩𝗂𝗏 to support writers in their literary production, and of course to cultivate communities for the safe exchange of ideas and the enrichment of our individual craft. Mads, can I ask you to show the program for today? Okay, so here's a program for today, what to expect. We're going to have a book talk in a while. Of course, we're very lucky to have the editors of the anthology, this important anthology here today. We have Dr. Gerald Burns here, and of course, Dr. 𝗩𝗶𝘀𝗶𝘁 Dalisay here with us, who I'll be introducing more formally in a while. And of course, we have representatives from the Milflores Publishing here. Attorney Andrea Passion-Flores is with us here today. She'll be giving a message in a while. And of course, very lucky to have some of the authors in the anthology here who will be doing some readings of their works later on. And I'm actually very happy to see that some of the authors in the anthology are, of course, authors from the 𝗩𝗂𝗏 as well. We have Miss Ana Sanchez, 𝗍𝗏𝗏, who we published just recently in 𝗩𝗂𝗏's Likhaan Journal Special Edition. We published his MA thesis. I saw that Professor Larissa May Suarez is in the anthology as well. She's a batchmate and a friend. So really a good mixed batch of writers in the anthology. So to formally open our program for today, I'd like to call on the director of the 𝗩𝗂𝗏 UP Institute of Creative Writing, Dr. Vladimir Gonzalez.
Salamat, Rex. Isin ko lang yung mic sindi. Hello, good morning. Magandang araw po sa inyong lahat. It is my honor to represent 𝗩𝗂𝗏, the UP Institute of Creative Writing, as we launch What Light It Can Hold, the Philippine Short Story in the 21st Century. This launch is part of 𝗍𝗶𝘀𝗶𝗏's PAN, Panayam sa Panitikan project, which is under the Institute's Literature for Social Development program. The LSD program, si Sir Roland yung ng LSD. The LSD program was previously named as the 𝗩𝗏𝗏𝗏, Literature and Translation for People Empowerment, or LLTPE program, na pinasimunuan naman ni dating director din na Sir Butch Dalisay. It was launched in May 2016 and is a continuing project of 𝗩𝗂𝗏 𝗍𝗶𝘀𝗏. The LLTPE was funded by the Office of the Vice President for Academic Affairs under the Emerging Interdisciplinary Research, or EIDR grant. The LSD, upon ending the EIDR contract with the OVPAA, was continued to the support of the UP Diliman Office of the Chancellor, as well as additional funding from the Department of Budget and Management. In 2021, nung nagka-COVID po, to embody the social climate and to make the focus of the ICW projects more explicit in its program name, napalitan po at nag-update tayo noong 2021 at ginawa pong Literature for Social Recovery, LSR naman po, Beyond COVID-19 program. So doon po lumabas yung 𝗩𝗻𝘁𝗃 COVID-19 journals na kasama rin yung ibang mga narito. In 2023, the UP-ICW reverted to the more general Literature for Social Development as we continue this series of projects. The Literature for Social Development program is a comprehensive interdisciplinary program dedicated to producing free and accessible training and materials for the development of artistic and critical thinking and expression. In its vision of the project, the writers from the Institute shall promote the development of other writers, both young and old. Baras naman po yung old. Seasoned and upcoming po. Grassroots and city-based, writing in regional tongues or in the global lingua franca, while initiating and nurturing the translation of materials from the intangible imagined consciousness of the Filipino society into literary text. May apat na component po ang project na ito, writer and teacher training, so more workshops po ito, forum, UPNWW, Amelia La Peña po ito, Bonifacio Writers Workshop, publications and translation, Likhaan journals at iba pang katuwang na proyekto, research and curation, kasama po bukod dito sa mga ganitong talakayan ay yung ating mga akdang buhay at akdang docu projects. And lastly po, information dissemination and knowledge sharing as embodied by paniticanph.com, yung website po na pinaka-comprehensive na literature portal sa bansa. So, masaya po kami na ilalahok ngayon bilang bahagi ng aming mga proyekto ang paglulunsad ng aklat na ito. We are grateful for Milflores Publishing for entrusting us with the launch. Maraming salamat, Ma'am Andrea Pasion Flores. Thank you po sa paglulunsad nitong napapanahong antolohiya, which is of course aligned with UP-ICW's vision of introducing and reintroducing relevant works in the context of Philippine literature. Pagbati, we congratulate our editors, Sir Butch, Dalisay, and Gerald Burns. Pagbati po sa inyo. As well as the individual contributors of this anthology. Nabanggit po ni Sir Rex na karamihan nga po ay mga naging bahagi ng iba't ibang LST projects ng Likhaan. Kaya masaya po kami na naitatampo kayo sa trabahong ito. In the university side, of course, we thank our partners from the College of Arts and Letters, Dean Jimel Naval at mga kasama. Maraming salamat po. UP Diliman Office of the Chancellor, at syempre ang administrative staff and project assistants, led po ngayon ni PB Maranya na nasa likod po. Kamukha po niya si Dennis na part ng kwentong inventories ni Ma'am Ana Sanchez mamaya. Thank you everyone for making this campus-based launch possible. At syempre maraming salamat po sa inyo na dumalo, our audience sa face-to-face launch and online to our Likhaan Facebook page na ang tawag nga natin ay mga fellow literature lovers. We love literature, of course. Kaya po tayo nandito. Thank you so much for taking time to share your light with us today. At with that, tatapusin ko po sa isang non-generic na statement. Maraming salamat at mabuhay ang panitikang Pilipino.
Thank you very much, Director Vlad Gonzalez. I'd just like to announce also that we are recording the session for today, but we're not live streaming it. We're going to delay the upload of the recorded material in the Likhaan Facebook page. Now, let's proceed to the book talk, but before that, I'd like to read read something about the book that we're launching today. What Light It Can Hold, fiction that reflects the fabric of the times, invites us to reflect on the times. What Light It Can Hold is a gathering of Philippine fiction published in the 21st century. It represents the concerns of Filipinos in the 21st century, showing mainly contemporary phenomena, but also casting a new light on situations from past decades. A Filipina is enticed to pursue her art abroad. An expat reassimilates in a Manila that has changed from the one he grew up in. Provincial folk find their simple way of life and beliefs shaken by new technology and mores. And family members express their hidden hurts towards each other through secret attacks. Very familiar. Many find daily life hard to grapple and retreat from it, while others surge forth with the courage of their pop culture heroes. The stories show some constants, no matter how unique the situations, the close familial and community ties Filipinos are known for, our deference to those above us in age and class, our openness to the existence of the supernatural, our struggles in transitioning from one point to another, literally and figuratively. In a land splintered into multiple little islands, communities, and subcultures, ideas, whether old or new, are challenged by contemporary values as we open ourselves to the world encroaching on us and the future trends of our literature. Now it's my honor to introduce the editors of this very important anthology, and also I'd like to call them up front. First off, Dr. Gerald Burns holds a PhD in American Studies from Yale University and Emeritus Professor of English at the Franklin Pierce University. The recipient of 3 Fulbright Fellowships for teaching and lecturing on American literature in the Philippines, he has cultivated a long-standing interest in Philippine literature. He is the author of Presenting America, Encountering the Philippines, 1993, and has written on such topics as the repatriate theme in Philippine fiction, the evolution of martial law genre, the American Dream, and the Filipino-American writer and contemporary Philippine short fiction. Ladies and gentlemen, Dr. Gerald Burns. Dr. Jose Dalisay is Professor Emeritus of English at the University of the Philippines, where he also chaired the English department and served as Director of the UP Institute of Creative Writing and Vice President for Public Affairs. He has a BA in English cum laude from the University of the Philippines, an MFA in Creative Writing from the University of Michigan, and a PhD in English from the University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee. Aside from publishing 40 books of fiction and nonfiction, he also edited the essential Manuel Arguilla Reader and the Likhaan, the Journal of Contemporary Philippine Literature. Dr. Jose Butch Dalisay. So now, without further ado, we give it over to Dr. Gerry and Dr. Butch for the book talk, for What Light It Can Hold.
Good morning. Thank you, Rex, for that wonderful intro for Gerry and me. For those of you who don't know Gerry, by the way, he's no, as you gathered from the intro, he's no stranger to the Philippines and to Philippine literature. I first met him when he served in our department as a visiting Fulbright professor, and we've had many chances to get together since then. You know, Gerry, I was looking at your messages on my phone this morning just to see how far back this project went, and I determined that you actually brought it up sometime in mid-2020, around July 2020. So that was almost a full 5 years ago, and it's kind of a miracle that we're launching this today after all that back and forth. But let me pop you the first question, which jumps right to the other end of that long process, which is this wonderfully intriguing title that you came up with, What Light It Can Hold. You know, we of course we had this back and forth also about, you know, what title should we give this project, and finally it was Gerry who came up with this. But I thought it was a brilliant idea. What light it can hold, but what the hell does it mean?
Yeah, thanks, Butch, for those kind remarks. It definitely has been a long time a-coming. So we're happy to be launching this book and letting it make its own way out into the world, since it's been a part of our world for so long. Yeah, the title is something of a found title, found in a facility I happen to be visiting in 𝗩𝗶𝘀𝗶𝘁, where weavers of Philippine piña were at work. Now, I say happened to visit. As a matter of fact, my wife more or less dragged me to this place. But once I was there, I took an interest, and my eye was caught by an inscription on one of the walls. And the inscription read, how fragile is a single thread of piña, how delicate, but look how much light it can hold. Almost immediately I thought, that can apply to the short stories that we're placing in this anthology. So I ran that by Butch and others in the group that we had assembled at that point, and we decided, that would make an apt title. So I think the qualities of delicacy and fragility that certainly evident in the piña fiber, which is thinner than a human hair and easily parted, they apply to the short story as well. Short story is not a novel, it's not an epic, it doesn't have that kind of scope, and short story writing, like literary writing pretty much in general, and like piña weaving, is a minority and an endangered enterprise. It holds a diminishing share of the overall scheme of cultural production. So the little adaptation we made of that inscription for our title, what light it can hold, that is intended to convey the limited capacity of the short story to offer any kind of sweeping or definitive illumination of the nation's life and culture. There is no 𝗍𝗏𝗍𝗃 among the stories in this collection. Nevertheless, the title phrase it's possible to understand that in a more expansive sense. The short story, like the piña, is a signature Philippine product. It holds a distinctive place in the nation's letters and even in its culture. And the stories, the kind of slender stories that we find in this volume, crafted by their makers with a patience, with a skill, with a devotion equal to that of the piña weavers, these can and do hold light to, granted, a limited but nevertheless a vital aspect of contemporary Philippine and larger human experience. So that's how the title came about. Let me try to extend that comparison between story writing, short story writing, and piña weaving just a bit to include what they share, which is a tradition, a rich tradition that the practitioners can draw from. And I'm particularly interested, Butch, to ask you, as frankly a master practitioner of that tradition and also an observer of its evolution over time, how do the stories in this anthology relate to that longer and larger history of the Philippine short story?
Well, it's interesting that you bring up this matter of the fragility of the short story, which I can understand in some respects. Like, for example, and of course Andrea knows this, being steep in the international book publishing market, at least until recently, when we went abroad with our books, the only thing that foreign publishers were looking for were the big fat novels. And apparently now They're still looking for novels, but not that fat. Not that fat. But they're still not touching short story anthologies, you know? And I was thinking about that because, I mean, in previous lectures, I have a lecture titled Novelists in Progress, which is what we are. I think as a body of writers, the novel hasn't really been our strong suit. And there are many reasons for that. Among them, the towering influence of Jose Rizal, who kind of set up a template that's very difficult to aspire to. Another way of looking at that, as I've also often said, is that we are sprinters. We're not marathoners, but we're great at what we do. I mean, stories have been in our literary lifeblood for the longest time, and we keep producing stories. The novels may be sparse and few, although now with the interested international publishing, our novels are bulking up. I mean, there's going to be more of them. But I think our special craft has always been in the short story. And I know that I, among other members of my generation, I grew up with the 𝗩𝗶𝘀𝗶𝘁 anthologies and dreamed about being in such an anthology at some point. I mean, stories are imprinted in our minds, from Dead Stars to How My Brother Leon Brought Home a Wife, and you know the Summer Solstice. These are all staples of the Philippine literary imagination. In a way, I posit that very few, if any, novels since Napoleon Philly have. And I still keep asking myself, why is that? And I think it's really because we want our stories done with in a, you know, within the time that we have to spend on them, and we want to enjoy them and think about them intensely within that brief span of time. That, I mean, we work very hard as people. We don't have a leisure time to read long novels. But stories, remember that's short stories developed in the Philippine weekly magazines, both in English and in Filipino. They were weak and fair, and so they were accessible. They were popular, probably aside from poetry, and even more accessible than poetry. They were our most popular literary form, and so the short story is again really, I think, aside from poetry, is our strongest literary form. Now, this new crop of stories that we're presenting to you, 21st century Philippine short stories, let me say, first of all, that we are not claiming that these are the best of the lot. Of course, they achieve a certain standard of quality, but we were not in the business of judging, you know, first, second prize, and third prize, and so on, which is something that some of you probably know I have kind of opted out of recently, because I think that representation, in a sense, is just as important, if not more important, than giving away prizes. Let's see what's out there, and let's present the range of material that Filipino writers are now producing. Gerry and I had a back and forth also about you know, should we just concentrate on stories in English, or should we bring in some material written in other Philippine languages and then get them translated? And ultimately, Gerry persuaded me that albeit not that much in terms of bulk, we would also bring some of these voices in, especially since there was this recent anthology, right? What's the title of that? 𝗩𝗲𝗁, yeah, 𝗩𝗲𝗁, which already covers Philippine stories originally written in other languages in translation, in English translation. So we didn't want to redo what they did. But for the international audience, I think it's important that they also have a sense of what our writers from outside, mainly the metropolitan centers, especially Manila, have been doing. So here we have, of course, mainly Filipino writers in English, originally in English, and then Filipino writers in translation, and also at least a couple of stories written from the diaspora, which again is also important because I remember that we used to have a kind of a small debate with NBM Gonzalez on this, and my point of view was that, it doesn't matter to me what your passport is. If you have Filipino roots or Filipino sensibility, then that's Philippine literature. And it doesn't even have to wave the flag to say it's Philippine literature, but it's part of our experience. So we represent that as well. Now, what differentiates this anthology, I think, from previous ones, from standards like 𝗩𝗶𝘀𝗶𝗏, and then of course there was that 20th century anthology published by or edited by Sagani Cruz. These are all excellent anthologies, but what we're seeing here is really how the range of material and sensibility has expanded. You look at Anna's story here, which deals with that generation that grew up on games, and it's really a whole other world from my own. Although at the same time, there's still a very strong realist core in this anthology. And there's a very, very strong representation of that. But it's I think the outliers that in a sense are much more interesting if you're looking for really how the story has grown. You look at, of course, there's Dean Alfar's wonderful kind of story in reverse, which is also a fantasy, but both the material and the method of storytelling are fascinating. And then there's that nether region between reality and fantasy, mediated by one's belief. The story about the woman who supposedly gave birth to a snake, and this is such a rich volume in terms of the range of its concerns. One of the stories that I pushed for very strongly was that story by Richard Ghie, which didn't even win first prize in the contest that it joined, but which really stuck in my head. It's that story about the gold miner in Benguet who sticks a nugget of gold up his ass, and goes home with it like a triumphant hero, even if he literally bleeds down there, because it was so emblematic of this whole idea of the OFW going out there, to bring home the goods. And I mean, I could go on and on about all of these stories, but what we have here is range, variety, sensibility, and of course, quality. We did go for that aspect of it in terms of within the ambitions that the story kind of presented. How well did it achieve these ambitions? How well did it execute its plan and its design? So that consideration is there too. And by the way, before I forget, let me just mention that it wasn't just Gerry and I who came up with this list. I mean, our names are on the book as its ultimate editors, but along the way, we tapped a lot of heads, names that you would know and hopefully respect, people like 𝗩𝗶𝘃𝗶𝘁, Merly Ilunan, Sarge La Cuesta, Joanna Lynn Cruz, and some others whom we engaged in discussions throughout all of these years to bring us stories, give us ideas about how to put a good representative volume together. They're in the acknowledgments, but ultimately it came down to Gerry and me to pick out what we thought was the best of the lot according to all those criteria, and here we are. 18 stories? Yeah, we were going for kind of a magic 20, but 18 is good.
Casualties along the way. Okay, I just wanted to touch on one point you made, Butch, about the tradition of the story and the place of the short story in Philippine letters. When I first got here, my first Fulbright, I was teaching here in UP, and I was teaching American Lit to Filipino students. So we were moving along, and at some point during the semester, it just kind of occurred to me, boy, this is kind of a one-way street. I don't know anything about Philippine literature. So I invited the students to teach me a work of Philippine literature. And so first thing was kind of a vote, see which piece that would be. I had no idea and no titles in mind. I had about 30 students in the class. I think probably between 25 and, well, at least 25 of the 30 students picked one single text. Manuel Arguilia's How My Brother Leon Brought Home a Wife. That really struck me. I think an American class would have picked The Great Gatsby, would have picked Huck Finn, would have picked a Toni Morrison Beloved, a novel. That really stuck with me. That was my introduction, what drew me into Philippine Lit, which was this marvelous short story, but also gave me a sense of how important that genre was. And it's been the case from almost the start. 𝗍𝗶𝘃𝗶𝘁, whom you mentioned, in a forward to his anthology, the forward written in 1940, said that the short story is a definite cultural force in our national life. It exploded. And it was the the basis of international recognition in that first generation of writers. So yeah, the short story has a special place, and we're hoping to kind of celebrate that in this anthology. Which is one more point to touch on. The first story you mentioned, Dead Stars, written by Paz Marquez Benitez, 1925, 100 years ago. So this anthology is kind of like a centenary for the Philippine short story. I did want to just add a couple things. You've really covered pretty well the selection process, the considerations that were involved. But I think that kind of the way it evolved was with this group that we had assembled. The first criterion that really emerged was quality. It was we are going to have only good stories, not just good, but very good stories in our anthology. It was like a solemn agreement. Now, identifying what makes a story good, agreement flew out the window. And we had considerations of every kind, highfalutin critical theories, personal favorites, pet peeves, everything entered. And it wasn't until we kind of pulled together some criteria from the O. Henry Short Story Prize competition that we began to sort of focus in on particular criteria of quality. But even then, the work was not done. We realized that we didn't want a best of approach, so we took pains to achieve this representative dimension, and that in itself was a whole other struggle. But I think we're really quite happy with the diversity that we achieved, the representativeness that we achieved in this volume, and certainly pleased to have the writers, young writers, and we have a writer whose story was written originally in 𝗲𝗏, who's going to be reading a portion of that story to us today. So I think we've in our struggle to achieve both quality and representativeness, we have something to be proud of, and readers have something to look forward to.
Gerry, in the few minutes that we have left, let me pop a question, which I'm sure is on everyone's mind here. Now, you're an American professor of literature. Looking at the Philippine short story, what observations can you make about the Filipino short story or Philippine literature as a whole compared to, say, the American short story? Is there any differentiating factor that you've come across?
Yeah, well, the first one that comes to mind is something that came to me when I was working on that piece on the repatriate theme in Philippine fiction. And this is sort of an emotional thing, but in Philippine literature, there's seldom triumph. There's often loss. Life is hard, and heartbreak is common. And that strikes me as quite different from the kind of, it's not just Hollywood, but even, more generally in American culture. People kind of expect someone to prevail, someone to win, and that's less the case here. I taught one of the American stories I taught was a Raymond Carver short story called A Small Good Thing. And it was a story about a family. The boy is hit by an automobile. Comes home, seems to be okay. Boom, loses consciousness. They take him to the hospital. And the doctor keeps encouraging them. No, he's really not that. It's not a coma. It's not really that injured. And they follow along with that. And lo and behold, the boy dies. And my American students are uniformly shocked by that. They don't see it coming. It's like, he died, but I thought that he was going to live. I thought that was, what the story was going to be. My Filipino students know right from the start, this kid is in big trouble. This is not going to end well. So that's a kind of emotional thing that I think probably maybe less now, but I would say the stories that we're going to hear from today are all on that kind of tragic side rather than the triumphant side. We won't hear the whole stories, that's for sure, but I would say there's still a good deal of that in the Filipino sensibility.
I think our time's up. So, and that's a very interesting point to maybe take up again in the Q&A after. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sir Butch, Sir Gerry. I'm very sure that medyo bitin yung book talk natin. But again, we'll have an open forum in a while. We've voted like 20 minutes for that. So please, if you have any questions or would like to react to anything that our editors have said, have talked about this morning, please do so later. But now, I'd also like to put the spotlight on some of the writers included in the anthology. And if you may, I'd like to read the authors included in the anthology. There are only 18, but I'd like to recognize them before we do the readings. So included in this anthology are Carl Joe Javier with Everybody Gets Off at 𝗍𝗶𝘶, Dean Francis Alfaro, The Maiden and the Crocodile, Lisely Tenorio with Monstrous, Socorro Villanueva with Foggy Makes Me Sad, Dennis Andrew S. Aguinaldo with Burgundy, Mia Alvar with The Virgin of Monte Ramon, Vicente Garcia Groyon with The Haunting of Martina Luzuriaga, Ian Rosales Casocot with Things You Didn't Know, Elena Paulma with Free Kisses, Ana Felicia C. Sanchez with Inventories, Terry C. Mangilaya with Snake, Larissa May R. Suarez with Sunday at the Cardozas. I think Ame is here at the back. Doms Pagliawan with Manila Bound is here, which was translated by Daryl Delgado, just a note. Ino Habana, The Mop Closet, is here. Monica Macan Santos with Love and Other Rituals. John S. Pukay with Missing Quarantine Pass. Richard Gia, mentioned by Sir Butch earlier, Blood and Gold in Benguet. And John Bengen with Armor. John Bengen won the Madrigal Gonzalez Best First Book Award of the Likhaan, I think a couple of years ago. And so now, without further ado, we have 3 of the authors here today, and they're going to read some of the excerpts from their work. And first of them, we have Professor Ana Felicia Sanchez to read something off of Inventories.
Don't start the time yet. This is actually Sir Vlad's. It's mine. This is the only time that I'll be able to do this, so I'm just taking advantage of it. I know Sir Butch has his collection of fountain pens and all things awesome, but that's mine. I did have a larger collection. I brought it all to the faculty center, and of course it burned because that's how life works. So no wonder our stories are like this. Okay, so yeah, I'll be reading from Inventories. but I'll be using my copy of my book. I'm sorry, because I made markings. I wrote Inventories in the early 21st century. It won a prize at the Philippines Free Press Literary Awards and is relatively my most anthologized work. I'd like to say that it's a story about heartbreak and meeting someone new, but the truth is that it's mostly about anime. I'll be reading from the first 2 pages where we find that the main character has first come home after 5 years of being away. Maybe you'll understand better if I start this way. In Full Metal Alchemist, Ed and Al, young, blonde, and extremely gifted brothers, attempt to bring their mom back to life through alchemy. Now, in sci-fi fantasy anime worlds, it's a pretty doable project. But what's crappy is not only does the alchemic process fail, but Ed also loses, very literally, an arm and a leg. But the really tragic thing is his adorable kid bro Al loses his entire body too, surviving only because Ed desperately manages to perform some high-level alchemic transmutation that fuses Al's soul to a nearby assemblage of armor. The point is, Ed and Al spend years trying to regain the bodies they'd lost because losing their limbs in an unsuccessful alchemy is awfully unjust. It's unjust because in alchemy, a person gets something out of what he or she provides. That's the rule. It's just like the law of conservation in chemistry and physics, only here it's called the principle of equivalent trade. The equation has to be balanced. I don't know if Ed and Al ever get to balance the alchemic equation. I lost track of the series when I ran across some trouble last year, but I doubt it. I mean, even if you do get something out of what you lost, do you think it'll really ever be worth the loss? In my case, I got this unit as soon as I arrived because Ma and Dad have been itching to retire to their 2-story rest house in Tagaytay, and the only thing that stopped them is the townhouse being orphaned. The day I entered the house and I was standing in the middle of the living room where nothing at all had changed, I felt my stomach swirl and turn like it was enjoying a ride in a centrifuge. I wanted to puke, a flood of puke if I could. But only hardcore rock stars ever drown in their own puke, and it's such an inglorious way to die anyway. So I swallowed the liquefied guts working their way up my throat and breathed in and out like a good girl. Nothing has changed, Ma declared, because she must always state the obvious. Ma is old, but she's made it through the rain. She'll be 22 forever. Sometimes I get to hoping that maybe if I spend enough time with her, I'll be 22 again. It's all yours now, Nika, she added, looking away from me. If I follow her gaze, I would see the misty gray volcanoes and the lake and the sky merging into a smoky blue, all this visible from the rest house window up in Tagaytay. I considered begging her to take me with her, but it was pathetic enough to be crawling back home. The plastic yellow flowers on the coffee table, the framed photographs on the walls, the matryoshkas by the TV, and upstairs, my room, my poor, lonely room. All of it was mine now because my parents had borne all that they could. I didn't want to own any of it, but at this point, the only other choice was to sleep on the streets. That's how it is. You came up to me, armed with a dimpled smile and a lame portmanteau of the world's most used pickup lines. Hi, I think you're new around here. You look familiar. Have we met before? You were peering through the gaps in the gate as I was hanging my underwear to dry. I guess I didn't look 28 to your 23. And if I hadn't been hearing Samurai X and Naruto themes blaring from your window the past few nights, I would have screamed, "Pervert!" and dashed frantically indoors. But I figured that a pervert who listened to J-pop was probably just a geek. I had no clear idea of how lucrative your family's materials contracting business was, nor how much of a geek you truly were, until you showed me your collection. Money to Burn got you DVDs, art books, manga, ivory cut figurines, and even costumes of just about every anime series in existence. It was a memory, sharp and painful, that prompted me to ask, "Can I see your Ghost Fighter collection?" "Sorry, it's a relatively old anime, isn't it?" You smiled, tilting your head in a way that I would come to adore. "I was only in high school when it first showed. Why? What's the series to you?" Ghost Fighter, the title given to the series Yu Yu Hakusho when IBC 13 first aired it in the mid-1990s, years before GMA7 bought the rights and paved the way for anime explosion. Author, Yoshihiro Togashi. Number of animated episodes, 96, with one 30-minute feature and one full-length film. Number of comics volumes, 12. Or was it 11, 13, 9? I couldn't remember. It had been years since I last cared. My VHS tapes of tagalized Ghost Fighter episodes lay in their vault, collecting mold and dust. Oh, just some cartoons I used to love, I said. But the next thing I knew, you had dug up your parents' old VHS player and we were going through the series one episode at a time, reliving Ray Gun and Black Dragon Spirit Power and adventures in the demon world and all that. With you, for a time, remembering became sweet. I pondered for a long time when you offered to buy the rest of my Ghost Fighter collection. I entered my bedroom where, thanks to my mother, some things had in fact changed. The comforters, the blankets, the bonnets, the blouses, the pants, the dresses, the sneakers, the stuffed animals, the puzzle mats, the board games, the alphabet charts, the large pink Etch-a-Sketch, the Lego Junior Edition missing 4 bricks, the pink and blue bicycle with worn trainer wheels, the Rugrats coloring books with the carefully colored pages, the Disney mini piano organ that was used for playing Row, Row, Row Your Boat Out of Tune, the 3 feet tall Barney doll, which had been well worth the missed lunches and movies and books because the kid loved it so much. These were all long gone by the time I had returned from my 5-year vacation. My parents had been forced to clean out Ronnie's stuff, the same reason they took over the wake and the funeral. I was gone, far and away, and the only thing I was sorry for was that I hadn't been able to tell Ma to get rid of the stuff in the glass cabinet. The glass cabinet was my Ghost Fighter shrine. It stored rolled-up posters and wall scrolls and displayed 16 fans, 10 keychains, 564 cards, 11 rulers, 11 erasers, 12 figurines, 2 t-shirts, 8 charcoal sketches, 4 audio tapes, 18 videotapes, 10 audio CDs, 6 original DVDs, a pirated VCD collection with bad subtitling, and a Sega game cartridge. And in one corner lay an ancient Sega Mega Drive. I hated you because you had a great dimply crooked-toothed smile, and the thought of it made me open the cabinet, forced me to take an inventory of what was left behind. In the end, I took out the VCD collection and calculated how much money I could make you pay for it. Thank you. Hi.
Thank you, Ms. Anna. I felt a bit giddy hearing about FMA and Yu Yu Hakusho, because that's what I grew up with too. Our next reader for this session is Doms Pagliawan to read from Manila Bound. Sir Doms.
Thank you. Good morning, Sir Gerry and Sir Butch. I'll be reading the portion of the story wherein the old couple who were invited by their son to come to Manila for the first time were already on board the vessel that would ferry them to the big city, to the dream city. Since this is a translation from Waray, I'd like to read the first and the last sentences in the original. So, sugad han binuhat han iba nga mga pasahiros nga kasasakay la. Di da nalay ramang kaloy nga lingkod haligid han aragian bisan kon pasadiso hin mga tawo. So, just like what the other passengers who just boarded the vessel, Mang Kaloy and his wife just put down their cargo and perched near one of the walkways, even if the location was inconvenient and they had to contend with people passing and overstepping them frequently. There was nowhere else to settle on. What's important, said Mang Kaloy, was that they made it to Manila. Otherwise, Amado would be kept waiting there at the pier. And we'll right away hand him his young pig, so he'll be happy. Manabising responded, smiling brightly, her yellow teeth showing, her breath slightly sour. But of course, he'd be very pleased indeed, Mang Kaloy said. I think it won't be long before this pig is good enough for roasting as lechon. He adjusted his hold on the swine and caressed its belly. He couldn't put the animal on the floor in front of him because of too many people passing who might step on it. While the pig was pressed against his chest, it suddenly twisted itself exerted effort and emitted a loud sound from its anus. The pig expelled feces, which caused 𝗏 Kaloy to swing the pig away from his body and let go of it, so that it fell on the floor, and as soon as it was able to stand, it ran as fast as it could, seemingly in fear. 𝗏 Kaloy's long-sleeved shirt was full of the pig shit, but immediately went after the animal. The chase took him to different parts of the boat. The pig was fast. It quickly went under the labyrinth of cuts. The old man bumped and hit corners in his effort to chase after the pig. He stumbled over cargo and people who yelled angrily at him because of the pig shit that he scattered around in the process. In a short while, 𝗏𝗏𝗍𝒻 was on her feet, ready to help in capturing the animal. She thought it was important that they catch it immediately, or else it might jump into the sea. They both looked like children in a game of chase and catch. The problem was that the boat was too crowded and there were too many nooks and crannies that the pig could go into. They were both drenched in sweat. 𝗏 Kaloy, his clothes sticking to his tired body, was also starting to smell really bad because of the feces still all over his front, splattered across the whiteness of his shirt. People he passed scrunched up their faces. The others covered their noses. Since my time is getting short, I'll go to the... the piglet ran outside the boat and all the way to the pier and, to the, shall we say, let me use the old term, squatter area. Okay, where the houses were, clustered and people had no CRs, things like that. And the piglet was under those houses and the couple were still chasing the piglet under the mud. I mean, in the mud. Okay, so there, finally, I'm here. Finally, the swine ended up against the corner of walls and had nowhere to run. 𝗏 Kaloy immediately jumped on it, caught its feet, and lifted it. The young piglet struggled against him, still trying to break free, adding more filth to the white shirt. The couple ran as fast as they could back to the boat, carrying the pig with them. They didn't know that the boat was already some distance from the port. It was already making a turn for the open sea and preparing to move faster. They only learned of this when they reached the place where the ramp and anchor had been. "Hoy, wait for us, we're still here!" 𝗏 Kaloy yelled, waving his hands frantically, jumping up and down like a lumatod. Lumatod is a child, innocent child. 𝗏𝗏𝗍𝒻 joined in the screaming. They took turns, their voices loud. 𝗏 Kaloy attempted to jump into the sea to swim after the boat, but 𝗏𝗏𝗍𝒻 held him back and reminded him that he didn't know how to swim. Despite their loud wailing, the boat kept going until this was swallowed by the dark wall of rain. So in Waray, it says, "Haluyuhan ira pag kinuyahaw, waray nagod ang barko bumalik, ngang kaon na laini, han kasirom, ngan makusog nga oran." Thank you.
Thank you, Sir Doms. Coming from an island, born and raised, with no way out of the island, but through boat, that really hit quite close to home. I'm sure for a lot of the audience members as well. Last but not least, of course, we have 𝗍𝗏𝗀 to read his story, The Mop Closet.
Hello, good morning. Thank you. This story that I wrote started out as homework for one of my MA classes. So it started out as a homework, And it was the longest homework I've ever written because it took an inordinate amount of time writing it. It was a very, parang one sem. And then because it went back and forth until it came out, I think, well enough. It turned out well enough. So I really like this story as well. This story is about basically it's a childhood story of me growing up in an all-boys school. And it's like what our editors mentioned. It's quite tragic because it centers on a bullied child. The name of the kid is actually Neil, but he ends up getting called Bangkay the entire time because he's small and scrawny and all of that, which is actually a true story because I did grow up with a batchmate who had a worse name. We didn't call him not we as in me, but the other people in school didn't call him Bangkay. They called him Fetus because he was like really, really scrawny and Anyway, this is the story. I'll be reading from the first few pages. We lived in a part of Malate that never attracted any tourists. Drunkards, snatchers, and prostitutes wandered our street at night, in the same way that bullies prowled the school corridors by day. Our school was a good training ground for adult life. At an early age, we were forced to understand the dynamics of the human food chain. The world was divided into three groups of people: the prey, the predators, and the apex predators. Adaptation was a skill one needed to learn in order to survive. For most, this skill came easily, like it was born out of instinct. But this skill was completely alien to the socially awkward types, such as Bangkay. Under normal circumstances, Bangkay would have ended up as meat for the predators, but this kid was an odd, infuriating exception to the rule. Bangkay was often seen with a black dog. It orbited within a few meters of him like a canine guardian angel, deterring anyone who wanted to do him harm. There were some mornings when we would see the dog escorting Bangkay to school as he skipped his way through the gutters of our neighborhood. The hulking beast made up for its master's lack of brawn. It was a burly creature of dubious pedigree. Some said it was a German shepherd mixed with an Ascal. Some said it was a wolf. Some said it was a werewolf. It didn't seem to have a name because even Bangkay, despite his florid verbiage, just called it Doggy. So Doggy it was. It was rumored that Doggy had already killed a man. The number rose to 3 depending on the version being told. It happened on a dark and stormy night when Bangkay was walking home from school. A notorious snatcher wanted in our barangay blocked his way in one of the alleys. Bangkay walked past the snatcher as he smiled his clueless smile. Without knowing it, his backpack was slashed open. The snatcher made a move for Bangkay's wallet. But before the man could reach it, Doggy jumped in the path. The fur on Doggy's back bristled like spikes. As Bangkay walked on, the beast lunged at the snatcher. It latched its jaws on the poor man's neck and ripped out his vocal cords. There was a spurt of blood that smeared the walls of the alley. The snatcher tried to free himself from Doggy's bite, but he was tossed around like a rag doll. In another version, it was an entire gang of snatchers armed with ice picks. But it really didn't matter how many snatchers there were because they all ended up dead in the end. It's true, said Chito. He was my fat classmate and he sat to my left. If you walk down the alley, you could still see hardened blood on the walls. Chito would know, since his house was within a few steps of where the ill-fated man gurgled his last. His grandmother was even selling barbecue by the doorstep that night it happened. She got splattered all over and was not pleased. Tolitz, my seatmate to the right, believed that Doggy was some kind of supernatural beast. His family had recently transferred from Capiz, where he claimed that all the rich people were either aswangs or had aswang blood. These aswang families were said to own a pet that looked like a cross between a dog and a goat. It's a sigbin, Tolitz whispered to us during recess. He said it quietly, like he was actually scared. Tolitz claimed that his older brother was once chased by a sigbin through the streets of their town. Doggy looked at me this morning, he said, between bites of his sandwich. I think it knows I can tell what it really is. Cool, Chito said. Bullshit, I said, secretly thinking it was cool. But Doggy wasn't the only odd character in Bangkay's company. Although Bangkay was a common fixture in our neighborhood, nobody had ever seen his mother. We all knew who his father was, and we all knew that his father looked nothing like him. The man Bangkay called Papa was a dark-skinned fellow with a beard and a white turban. He went around in a red motorcycle carrying all kinds of household goods. Most of the time, it was just umbrellas. Bombay, we would snicker whenever Bangkai's father rode by on his motorcycle. Mrs. Miranda, our fourth grade teacher, said it was impolite to call Indians Bombay in the same way that it was impolite to call the Chinese 𝗍𝗡. She said that we should address Bangkai's father as Mr. 𝗩𝗀𝗎. Our class nodded in silent agreement. We settled for the happy medium though, calling him Mr. 𝗩𝗀𝗎 whenever he could hear us, but reverting back to Bombay whenever he couldn't. The women on our street subscribed to the theory that Bangkai was a kidnapped victim. They had many theories, all of which were formulated in the shade of our bakery at 5 o'clock in the afternoon when our pandesal was being sold for half the price. They said that when Bangkai was a toddler, he was hauled off on Mr. 𝗩𝗀𝗎's motorcycle like a piglet on its way to the fiesta. It's all the mother's fault, said Kagawad Minda, our former barangay Kagawad, who insisted on keeping her title despite being out of office for the last 3 years. She listed the boy as collateral for a loan, and when she could no longer pay for it, that Bombay took him as payment. I heard it differently, Auntie Pearl cut in. She was our street's returning OFW, now an expert in all things American. The mother probably sold the poor boy so she could process her US visa. He actually smells nice, you know, Tita Lulu said. She was the ninang of all the kids in our street, including me. Every Christmas, she would send her many godchildren dedicated pictures of herself, posing next to a Christmas tree in her living room, and that was all we ever got. You actually smelled him, asked Kagawad Minda, as in under his arms. They had sex, Mama mumbled under puffs of her cigarette. Tita Lulu was in the opposite end of the bread counter and didn't hear a thing. Yun lang. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Eno. And I'd like to promote that the book where Eno was reading from was published by Likhaan. It's his MA thesis and, of course, the collection of his short stories, The Summer of Growing Up, Stories of Childhood, Eno Habana. Thank you again, Eno, Sir Doms, Anna, for reading. Now, I'd like to call on back up front Sir Gerry and Sir Butch. We're going to open the floor for a few minutes to take questions from the audience. Even reactions, perhaps, from the book talk or even the reading sessions that we just did. Okay, so we have Neil up back with the microphone. Just raise your hand if you would like to ask a few questions or, again, react to the book talk or the book reading sessions.
Let me add too, Rex, that any questions for the authors would also be welcome.
Of course, since some of the authors are here as well. Anyone would like to ask? Yes, from the back, Neil.
Good morning. I'm Sam from College of Music. I have a question for any of the editors or the authors. When an author writes a short story, how do they make it reflect Filipino conditions or experiences? Or do they even have to make it reflect the experience in the first place? Or, well, I guess in short, what makes a short story Filipino and how do we have to make it Filipino? Coded, yeah.
Any one of you want to answer that?
It's a really good question because I think for a really long time I was told that my writing wasn't Filipino enough, and so that was like a point of concern, like how do you make something Filipino enough? And now I have students who don't care, and then their characters are raceless, and they're like they don't even think about it. So I do think it's going to be an author-to-author basis. And you also have to consider that there's like an entire stream of Filipino writing that is Filipinos who are writing, stories for like white audiences. And so it really falls down to what the personal politics of the writer are. But I would say that if you are steeped in a literary tradition and you're educated in the programs and all this stuff, you have no choice but to have it come through. And then I do think by virtue of the fact that our being Filipino, I think that should be enough. Like if Filipino ka like I have the passport enough to prove it. I don't need to really worry about it. And if you're brown and you get hassled in the airport and it's hard to get a visa, I feel like you have a right to represent our stories.
You'd like to recognize Sir Carl 𝗍𝗏, who just responded to that question, one of the authors from the anthology. Anyone else who would like to raise a question, perhaps?
Well, let's just add a bit to that answer. And, of course, the easiest way to brand your story as Filipino is to include visibly Filipino elements in it. But I think the Filipino-ness of a piece really is really a matter of its sensibility, the way it sees and represents the world. Ano ba nakikita natin sa isang, how does a Filipino see an airport, for example? When you enter a 7-Eleven, what's the first thing you go for? What are you looking for? These small things that once we recognize them, instantly we know, ay, kasi Pinoy. And they're very hard to catch, but intuitively they come to us. I don't really like, personally, stories that kind of, as I said earlier, fly the flag and declare themselves to be, this is Filipino, as if that were a settled matter. It's not. The Filipino remains a work in progress, and we mutate and change. We adapt to our environment. So it's a very tricky thing. But there are, as in gambling, there are tells that show us, ay, Pinoy yan. And that's really what I think, you don't go for that consciously, but it comes out intuitively.
With Sir Gerry would you like to respond to that, or maybe some of the other authors?
It's a Filipino story, Filipino for you. Yeah, aside from the tragic element.
This is a hard question for me because I don't come from this,
Exactly. That's why it's more interesting.
Yeah.
Coming from you.
I guess I would just say, the flying the flag is it's a kiss of death for any creative enterprise, I think. If that's your first foot forward, you have to just come forward with your foot. Without a painted flag on it. And that's what is going to make it Filipino or American or both Filipino and American. And all sorts of other things that aren't nationalities, whatever, but that are your identity and your experience. There's a Native American writer, and now his name is Sherman Alexie. And he has a book, and there's a lot of talk about being an apple, like red on the outside, white on the inside. And this boy goes to a school, a white public school. He interacts with people there. He's renounced by his tribe because he's betrayed them. He's gone elsewhere. He's taking a path in life that they can't take. And at the end, he realizes that this is what he has to do. This is who he is. And he's not. He is an Indian, but he's also all sorts of other things. He's a basketball player. He's an artist. He is the child of alcoholics. All sorts of things go to make up who he is, and only if he can own those things, represent those things in the creativity that he's seeking to express, is it going to be worth anyone's time, including his? I think this matter of Filipino-ness is it has to be grounded in authenticity. It has to be grounded in those choices of when you go into the 7-Eleven. And it can't be programmed for you.
Thank you very much, Sir Gerry, Sir Butch, Sir Carl Joe. Maybe we have time for one more question before we proceed with, of course, wrapping up the program. Any of our students who came for the program, would you like to ask something? Anyone? Yeah. The authors are here. Yeah, anyone? Okay, then I'll ask the question then. Yeah, so something maybe that I picked up during the book talk. We were talking about the difference of the stories, this set of stories from the tradition of like 𝗍𝗶𝘀𝗶 and 𝗦𝗍𝗍𝗂, the anthologies there. And yeah, the term contemporary, I guess, or even the signifier of the 21st century sort of signals like a break from tradition. Could you maybe expound on that? How do perhaps the stories in this collection really signal in this 24th century, this contemporariness, yeah, especially in the Philippine setting. Yeah.
Yeah, I can take a shot at that. It's a funny thing how tradition develops and how it's sustained. In the introduction, we write about back to the piña fiber. So it turns out that a thread of piña is actually a number of fibers tied end to end. So these are things, again, finer than a human hair that have to be tied by hand together to make a single thread of piña. And I think that it works that way with the literary tradition also. It's a thin matter, but it's end to end that it grows. And it takes this incredible dexterity, incredible art to tie that kind of knot. And what you end up with is something that has both continuity and change, difference. In terms of the stories in this anthology, well, one of the enduring themes in Filipino story writing, and more than Filipino story writing, is love, falling in love. And that's true in these stories. There are many stories of love. Here, I think one of my favorites is Carl Joe's Everybody Gets Off at 𝗩𝗶𝘀𝗀. So that's a continuity. The love story has always been popular here. What I notice in the stories in this anthology is it's love in the small things. It's kind of tiny gestures which relationships turn. In Carl Joe's case, there's a moment where the protagonist is at an absolute low point. He's had his glasses knocked off. He's crawling around on the platform of the MRT looking for his glasses. He's got snot running out of his nose. He is totally helpless. And what happens is someone hands him his glasses. And he sees blurrily that it's the young lady that he has had his eye on this whole time on these rides back and forth on the MRT. And his heart immediately fills. It's a small gesture, but that has turned his life around in that moment. So those are the things I notice. Enduring, themes, enduring situations, but differences in the way that they're presented, in the way that they're represented. And that's the way a tradition, I think, grows and sustains itself. It's that mix of continuity and innovation.
Thank you very much. Sir Butch, would you like to add?
I just wanted to say that what came to my mind, speaking of love, was the ending of 𝗩𝗶𝘀𝗶𝗃 story and that poor pig. You know, very, very powerful ending to that story. And that story is what I always ask of my students in my writing classes. Beyond being clever, give me a story that's moving and memorable. and that kind of story just does it for me.
Thank you very much, Sir Gerry, Sir Butch. I think that's pretty fitting end. We started the book talk talking about the piña fiber, and then we ended it with talking about textile, the simultaneity of like continuity and change. So thank you very much again to the editors of this very important anthology, Dr. Gerald Burns, Dr. Asst Dalisay. And now I'd like to call on the publisher of Milflores, or of the book we have today, Attorney Andrea Pashon-Flores. Will give her message. Flores.
Iba talaga if the editor was your teacher, technically, you can never say no. Okay, so good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for spending time with us with this book. So when you're a publisher, I guess what I'm going to talk about is a little bit of process, no? And a little bit of our lineup. So since September of last year, when I was listening to everyone, and I think this is not my first anthology of its kind. So since September of last year, so usually because of the book fair, all the new titles drop during the book fair. So because this year we had an early book fair, the drops were sooner. So we had one last week. So since September last year, or within 6 months, in my notes here, it says, What Light It Can Hold is our third collection of short stories, when in fact it's our fourth, that Milflores has published. So last year, we published Charles Ong's Sojourner Settler's Seer, which collects all of Charleson's short stories. The short stories number 34 stories in his whole life. It's not easy to write a short story, as the authors know, and if your whole life it's just 34, it's everything he ever wrote, right? And we even found one, because he does not collect his stuff, so please collect your short stories, no? Half of it we found in 𝗍𝗶𝘃 Library, and the other half we found in the Ateneo Library, kasi serialized. So, this first quarter, in time for the Philippine Book Festival last week, we introduced 2 short stories, Vital Signs, Stories on Healing by Medical Dr. Ronnie Baticolon and Dr. Marjorie Evasco. That collection featured 13 short stories. And finally, this collection of short stories, edited by Gerald Burns and Asst Dalisay, What Light It Can Hold, a collection of 18 stories with its ambitious goal of illuminating contemporary Philippine reality. Right? And I'm thinking, why am I thinking this is not our first of its kind? Because also last year in September, we published contemporary Spanish stories in Filipino. And it had sort of the same goal. And I feel we do not read, we are very Western-oriented, as we know, but I was corrected by a German person. You are not Western-oriented, you are American-oriented. Because if you go to the bookshops, you will see the wonderful distribution of Penguin Random House. So we're not even reading the West, we are reading the US. Okay, just keep that in mind in your reading. And when we came out with that collection of short stories in Filipino of Spanish contemporary writers, I remember that's what was going on in my mind, that the Filipino does not read enough of the world. And certainly for this particular collection, in my mind, I'm thinking we don't read enough of each other also, and we don't have enough collections that reflect each and every part of the region, which was, I think, also the ambition. So when I was in my previous job in Anvil, I remember pitching a collection of short stories by my teacher called Voyager, if you remember that, to a young editor, and she was American. And she told me that she already had a collection of short stories and has therefore already done her bit, having done so in my case, having done 4 collection of short stories, wrap it up, said the person, I have already done my bit 4 times over. So when I pitched this collection to a Greek publisher who was willing to have a look at short stories, he pointed to the number of pages as stated in the catalog. Sight unseen, 366, wala pa yung front matter. No? And then he said, it's too long. Translators are paid by the page or by the word. So send me shorter. Yes, I'm sorry, guys. That's the reality. I also sent this to an American indie publisher who, after I talked about the Philippine market, showed our archipelago and how diverse we were, he said, a collection of short stories showing the diversity of the Philippines would be interesting. But then I think his interest kind of petered out. Okay, so I think the hope that when we read this, you will all be suitably impressed by the breadth and scope of the Philippine short story as it exists now. Written, I think, or collected for the contemporary Philippine reader, right? So we would all be suitably impressed at how diverse our stories are, how rich our culture is, no? And for me, it had to come out during the Philippine Book Festival so that it might be scoped by the DepEd teachers who will buy it for the what did he call it? Their hubs, their book hubs, no, in the provinces, and that the Filipino young person, the Filipino young reader will be able to read himself in the stories that we can find in this book. And that, for me personally, this gives me a list of upcoming authors whose longer works I would be very excited to read. So guys, thank you for having us, and please, when you have your own long works, please think of Milflores. I'd like to thank the editors for their trust in Milflores, and hopefully we do this book justice. So thank you very much, everyone.
All right, so thank you very much, Attorney Andrea, and again, thank you very much to the audience who made time this morning to attend this event. We're now officially closing our program. We have snacks at the back, and we have coffee as well if you'd like to grab some before we go out. And if we may, can we ask everyone to pose with our editors and our publishers up here on front for a photo opportunity. Again, this has been the launch of What Light It Can Hold, the Philippine short story in the 21st century. And to take a page from Attorney Andrea, let's read each other. Thank you very much. Good morning.